This is Techzine Talks on Tour, the podcast about enterprise technology that brings you IT insights and analyses from events all around the globe. We cover everything, everywhere. Visit techzine.eu for more information, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast.
Welcome to this new episode of Techzine Talks on Tour. I'm Sander and I'm at Pega World Inspire this week, and I'm with Don Schuerman, the CTO of Pega Systems. Welcome to the show, first of all.
Great to be here.
There's a lot of GenAI going on at the moment, right? I heard somebody on stage saying it's GenAI. That's the future for development, at least, right? What's your impression of where we are at the moment when it comes to AI or GenAI, more specifically?
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting kind of inflection point, right? I think, one of the things that we are constantly reminding our clients is, in some ways, AI is not new.
No. They're around since the 50s or something.
There have been predictive models and statistical data models, what we often call AI decisioning, that, in Pega's world, we've been working with clients with for over a decade. And I think sometimes a lot of the hype around GenAI, and we're going to use, GenAI to do this and that, ultimately comes down to, well, actually, no, what you probably want is a really good predictive model that you can build on your own data set and construct it relatively quickly. You don't need a whole bunch of NVIDIA chips in order to build this thing. It's transparent. It can explain what it's doing. And it actually can add real value to your business. So what I'm seeing is clients really starting to step back and think about how they're going to apply GenAI. Yeah. What are the use cases and challenges it can address? And then realizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You need to apply different types of AI and different approaches depending on the problem you're trying to solve and the regulations and data world you're running in.
Would the cover term maybe pragmatism? Maybe look at it from a more pragmatic point of view.
I think
last year when we all did all the big stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is a transformational technology in much the same way, right, that the internet was a transformational technology. But we get to that transformation by taking pragmatic steps.
Yeah.
Right? And I think what I'm starting to see organizations do is begin to look for and identify what are those pragmatic steps so that we can actually prove value, we can prove trust, and we can begin to sort of build that groundswell needed to drive the transformation we want to see.
It's one of those things that people always say about this is that a new technology, the impact of a new technology is overstated in the short run, but understated in the long run.
In the long run, I think we're exactly in that. And I don't know if generative AI is going to directly follow the Gartner hype cycle. It feels like the hype cycle is moving so fast right now. It feels like a bunch of loop-de-loops as opposed to like a single kind of trough of disillusionment. But I think we will move through that, and we will see use cases and usages that kind of pop out into that plateau of productivity.
Yeah, and do you see, are there learning or learning points that you can take with you from the AI, the old-fashioned AI, maybe we should call it now, into the Gen AI world, that we don't make the same mistakes that we made in the past?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think part of the use case, the part of the lessons come back to identify the use case. Right at the end of the day, the goal of an organization shouldn't be to use Gen AI.
No.
In the same way that the goal of the organization shouldn't be to use Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. The goal of the organization should be to drive their business. And if Gen AI can be a tool that adds productivity to their employees, that helps them tackle problems they couldn't tackle before, that helps them deliver better experiences to customers, great. But you have to put it in the context of what's the actual problem I'm trying to solve? What's the actual outcome I'm trying to drive?
But that's actually... That sounds very logical, right?
Yes.
And I think you made it a point on stage also this week that you said we build it around the case, right?
Yeah.
But especially with this kind of technology, the case is also a bit of a fluid kind of concept, right? So
yes.
How do you do that? How can you build around the case if the case isn't yet very well defined? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. So I think we've been trying to look at Gen AI through two lenses. One is there's a set of productivity use cases that I think we're all going to want to adopt, right? A simple example of that is summarization.
Yeah.
We know GenAI is pretty good at summarization.
Of text, yes.
Of text.
Not necessarily voice.
Not necessarily a voice. Well, if you can get the voice to text, then it can summarize it, right? And we have technology that can turn voice into text.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good at summarization. And especially it's pretty good at summarization if the end consumer of that summarization is an employee who you're still going to hold accountable for to, like, make sure the summarization is correct and valid. Right? And so I think we're going to see summarization in lots of places. I see it when I do a WebEx meeting. I get it in my email. We've already put summarization into, like, the contact center app that we have that allows you to summarize customer interactions, or in case management at Pega so that you can summarize what's happening in a case. That's a nice productivity enhancement, right?
Well, that's quite generic. I mean, I think everybody would like to have that, right?
Right, and I think over time it's going to be something that we just expect, like spell checking. We just expect to have as part of the various apps and tools that we use. And I think it's important for us to do that because, frankly, I think it's going to become table stakes. But I also think enterprises need to understand that they're not going to differentiate their bank from another bank because they have summarization tools available to their employees.
No. But do you think it will remain at that point of just the relatively low level, very, 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 very tightly defined kind of use
productivity
cases?
Tools? Yeah. So I think those represent a great place to start, because they keep human in the loop. They're safe. There's some measurable business value attached to them, so by all means, like, deploy them, test them, validate them. But I think the enterprises that are able to push up into more transformational usages of it, right? So, like, one of the ways that we see that happening, and again, I think part of what we need to have in this time period is a little bit of an openness to experimentation and see what works and see what doesn't. But one of the places where we see real opportunity is helping organizations think differently about some of the core aspects of their business. Pega, we are a workflow and decision company. So we tend to think about workflows a lot. We tend to think about decisions a lot. And we know from our experience, and probably it's the experience of anybody who's ever been through a process re-engineering effort, that getting people to align on what a workflow should actually be can be pretty painstaking. If you're not careful, you can end up sort of repaving the cow path, right? Like there are suboptimal outcomes that can happen. Well, if I can use GenAI in partnership with some best practice documentation to recommend a starting point if I want to implement a new workflow, that can both accelerate that kind of requirements design process, so that's good, but it also can push the business to think in new and different ways.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned push, but that was because that was one of my follow-up questions. Is like, do you experience pushback in that? Because this is also a human kind of issue that you need to solve to actually start working with GenAI, right? Because there needs to be trust, there needs to be all the things that you need as an employee or as an organization as a whole to say, well, okay, this sounds good, but is it good for us?
Well, and that's why, for example, the tool that I'm talking about here is called Pega GenAI Blueprint, and we just made it available free on our website. And part of the reason for that is we want people to be able to touch it, see it, play with it, respond to it, and start to understand this isn't a magic trick, right? We're here in Las Vegas. This isn't like a magic show where I'm trying to astound you and amaze you. No. I'm just trying to give you a tool. And I'm trying to help you see that, hey, I can think of, in this instance, GenAI as like a really smart sounding board that I can throw an idea off, and it might come back with a different suggestion.
So in that respect, it's good to realize that this is just another tool that you can use. I mean, we shouldn't make too much of it, right? I mean,
I think in general, right, as the software industry, we like to hype everything, right? And everything that happens is going to transform everything.
That's what I always try to de-hype.
Right. And I think, to your point earlier, I really do think in the long term, we're going to look back on this sort of cusp and flip that we've had with GenAI and say, wow, that changed a lot of things. Yeah. But I think the way you get to that is almost, as you say, by de-hyping it. Yeah. By saying, it's technology. It's a tool. There's always going to be new technology. How do I apply this to the really meaningful problems that I have? How do I test that, validate it, learn from it, get experience with it? And if I do that enough in a continuous cycle, I'm going to look back and realize, oh my gosh, we completely shifted the way we've been working.
Yeah. But that's the way of the world anyway, right? There's also with your own knowledge. I mean, it also builds up over time, and after it's all right. I know quite a bit about this now.
Right.
I didn't know anything 10 years ago. That's more or less the same.
It's like look, if you want to train and run a half marathon, you go out and you run a mile, and then you go to run a mile and a half, and then you row 2, and next thing you know, it's like, wow, I can run 10 miles. I didn't know I could do that. It's the same kind of idea.
So, but there is just. Yes, no question. Is GenAI something for every type of company? Or is it yes, unless, or?
Yes, I think, again, I keep coming back to the analogy of Excel.
Yeah.
Like, I really do think in many ways this is going to become a prevalent tool. I don't think any company exists without using some sort of spreadsheet or office program.
But if you use that analogy, then also there's the lack of adoption of underusing Excel is also the problem, right? Because Excel can do so many things that most people don't even know.
Yeah.
You don't want to have that to repeat that mistake.
But you also don't want to overuse Excel, right? I'm sure we've all opened up Excel workbooks that have so many macros going on inside them that like the thing can't even open on your computer, right? So as with any tech, it's how do we apply it? How do we use it for what it's really good for? How do we attach it to a business use case? And how do we not shove so much into it that we're overwhelming our capacity to appreciate it?
So that's sort of a process-oriented kind of thing, right? You say, well, how do we want to use it? So you need to think about how you want to use it. But are there also technical challenges for companies thinking about starting to use GenAI in their daily lives? For example, data access, or
Well, I think one of the important things to understand, or at least in my mind, is the distinction between this decisioning or statistical AI, which companies can and will train on their own data. Right? We heard from the National Australia Bank this morning who are using Customer Decision Hub to improve customer decisioning based on their own data about customers. Generative AI is very different. Most enterprises, even really, really big enterprises, do not have enough data to train their own GenAI models. No. They don't have the data, they don't have the chips, they don't have the talent. So GenAI is more going to be like a power source that we plug into. The models are already built. We just use them. Yeah. So the question, I think, for the enterprise becomes, how do you use those in a way that interact with your data, but do it in a way that is safe?
Yeah, but and also, especially when it comes to RAG, which is, I think, the most popular use case of GenAI ever since it was introduced last year, somewhere last year. That
RAG pattern retrieval augmented generation, where you basically apply your own content into
but
GenAI.
Then you need to decide what is the data that this RAG is going to use, right? I mean,
that's right.
You need to think about that as well as a company.
You do, and again, that to me comes back to use case, right? So that RAG, may be a set of knowledge content, right? That I take and I use that to drive prompts into the GenAI model to summarize for me. And that might be really good if I'm trying to solve the access of my customer service agents to content and information. Yeah. That RAG may be large amounts of customer history because I want to be able to ask questions and query the GenAI about what customer history patterns are happening, right? So pulling that data into the RAG, and I think companies are going to need to decide, do they build some skills around doing that using technology like embeddings and vector databases and all the pieces that are needed to make that work? Or do they sometimes look at cloud-based services, like that's what we have with what we call Pega Knowledge Buddy, which kind of packages that all up, so you focus more on instead and say, well, what's the content I want to feed into that, and how do I make sure that I can govern that content in an ongoing way? Yeah,
but then it's still you still need to be able to trust what it gives back, right? Obviously, you have this sense of this is my own data, so the data points are correct because you probably curated it before you before you say look there for the answer, but it can still make wrong connections between.
It can, right? We've seen that. I think there've been a couple of publicized incidents where even RAG models, right, have recommended wrong things, and that's why I do think even with stuff like that, it's going to be an employee in the loop for a period of time because we want to know. I think most enterprises are fine with giving an employee as a RAG model that's giving some answers. Well, you train the employee to say, hey, by the way, you're going to get this answer. You should validate it. You're going to get, as part of the RAG, link back to the source content, so you have the tools you need to validate it. Yeah. But you need to feel accountable for validating that, which is very, very different than just saying, like, oh, we're going to put a RAG-based chatbot on the website and let customers ask it questions, right? So I think those are some things that we have to build up a maturity curve to be able to get to.
And also maybe you need to define best practices and all these things around it as well. How to do it properly.
Absolutely. And what are the guardrails? What are the audits that need to be put in place? That's why we've spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, if you want to do RAG at an enterprise scale, what governance do you need to wrap around it? Yeah. What auditing do you need to wrap around it? What security protocols do you need to wrap around it? Because to me, that's where the challenge of making this stuff work is.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's obviously the other part of AI in general, and I think that it also plays a role in GenAI. Is that I remember 5 years ago I was here as well, and it was all about back then it was all about statistical AI, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about explainability and predictability. Absolutely. And that was very important, and it was all the craze, and it's still important. But GenAI is very hard to explain and to predict, right?
Well, and I think one of the things that's really important, again, this is why it kind of is almost fingernails on the blackboard sometimes when I hear organizations talk about their AI strategy, because what you really need is an AI's strategy, because there are multiple AIs that you apply in different ways. The statistical AI that we were just talking about can be very explainable. Yeah. The other thing that's also really, really important about it is it's deterministic. Yeah. So in other words, it's making probabilistic models.
And if you do it three times,
if I feed the same data into the model will give me the same answer 3 times. Yeah. Generative AI is not deterministic. So you have to be comfortable leveraging it in use cases where the fact that it's not going to give you the same answer maybe even is a good thing, right? That's why I think using generative AI, for example, to suggest workflow designs is great. Yeah. Because you can ask it, throw an idea off, hey, if you don't like it, ask it again. And it'll come back and give you a different variation. Again, it's like a brainstorming partner that you can work with.
What I really like about that, basically, actually, is that it also can help prevent bias.
Right.
Right? Because you can actually, it can give you stuff that you're maybe from yourself, looking at it from your perspective, you wouldn't think of.
Exactly.
But it can actually give you something that you didn't expect.
I was saying this morning that I think inclusivity and innovation go hand in hand, and the reason that is the more voices, more perspectives you bring in, the more ideas that you might not have available in your perspective set are available to you.
But then
GenAI can open that a little bit.
But then it also gets. It also muddies the water a little bit in a sense, because what do you leave out? Because you probably don't, like, for example, if you do the GenAI blueprint, you ask it to come up with parts of your application that you may want to build, but then you need to decide which parts you want to keep, which parts don't you want to keep, and that's still a trial and error kind of thing.
But that's still a trial and error. But that's stuff that you're going to have to do anyway if you wanted to build an enterprise application. Yeah, right. That's true. And I'd much rather you start with an idea, a starting point that feels optimal, that GenAI and some of our best practices can help you provide, and then have that conversation about what to put in, what to leave out, rather than spending 9 weeks to get to the point that you're ready to have that conversation.
But doesn't the lack of predictability and explainability prevent GenAI to be part of really the core processes and the core of companies?
Well, I think...
Because back in the day, explainability was sort of a must, especially for a highly regulated kind of area.
I think it really, really depends on the use case. Like, we're talking about using GenAI design time to help you design your business process. Once you run it, I actually want to use statistical AI to predict what might happen next, where you have explainability, you have determinism.
You get back to the AIs.
Right, exactly. Like, there are places I might use generative AI during a process to draft an email that I want to send, but I want to keep a human in the loop to say, hey, we've drafted this email. You need to validate it and approve it, and the process is going to audit that you did it. So that nobody can say GenAI is responsible. No, you got to audit it and you did it, right? So I think that's why it really comes down to the use case, the user, and the controls you wrap around it.
So in that sense, statistical AI may have its own identity to a certain extent, but GenAI won't, because there's always somebody who has to sign off.
I think in the near term, right, GenAI is always going to have that sort of sign off wrapped around it.
All right, funny you mention it, because we're almost out of time. So maybe on stage this week you were talking about the future of AI, which is completely unpredictable.
Completely unpredictable. But I think my whole point was that nobody really knows.
No, but
right?
you already mentioned some stuff about 10 years from now we're going to look back at this point and say, look how far we've come.
Yeah.
Do you see that because that's why I wanted to ask this question is. Based on, I think, research you commissioned, one of the key findings was that GenAI also made AI, so the old-fashioned AI, more popular, or more being more adopted more.
Exactly right.
So, do you see this as sort of a step up for proper AI? Maybe that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Statistical AI or decisioning AI, right? Like, so what? Those of us who've been around AI for a while will know that we've been through a lot of AI cycles, right? We had AI was a hype in the 60s and 70s when it was expert systems, then it went away, then it came back and it was predictive models, then we entered the AI winter and it went away, and then Google, initially AI was back again with sort of Google, and then Salesforce Einstein, and then it disappeared again, and then it came back with GenAI, right? So I think we go through these hype cycles and these waves. As we do with, frankly, every technology.
Yeah, it's like 3D movies, right?
Exactly.
There's 3D technology for movies.
3D movies. You know, I was thinking about, like, looking back, right? So, like, you know, one of the great we talk about this AI being almost like the internet. Right? One of the great examples of the internet sort of bubble bursting was Pets.com. You remember Pets.com, right? Yeah. That's a symbol of the bubble bursting. I order all of my dog food on Chewy.com. So it's like, you know, we end up back there. We end up at the transformational point eventually. It just, we have to make it takes a couple false steps, false runs to get to the end point.
So no big predictions about where we're going in terms of AI?
I mean, look, I think we're going to see it in the enterprise. I think we're going to see AI injected into transformational thinking and help us kind of push transformational thinking. And I do think there's a huge opportunity, as we've been talking a little bit about in this conference, especially for enterprises that struggle with things like legacy modernization and legacy transformation, to plug AI in as a tool to help accelerate that. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year from now we look back and say, boy, we accelerated a lot of our legacy transformation in ways that we didn't think were possible.
Because you can pull in a lot of your legacy stuff.
You can pull in a lot of your legacy stuff and help transform it into something different.
That's a good note to end this conversation on, I think, because it's a positive one. I always like that. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure seeing you.
Looking forward to next year and see how big the impact has actually been of what we've been talking about this week.
Yeah, it'll be exciting.
I hope so.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Techzine Talks on Tour. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like more information, please feel free to visit techzine.eu, where we cover everything, everywhere. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again on the next episode of Techzine Talks on Tour.